सांगिकं भुवनं यस्य वाचिकं सर्ववाङ्मयम् आहार्यं चन्द्र तारादि तं नमो सात्विकं शिवं मूषिकवाहन मोदकहस्त चामरकर्ण विलम्बितसूत्र वामनरूप महेश्वरपुत्र विघ्नविनायक पादनमस्ते सरस्वती नमस्तुभ्यं वरदे कामरूपिणि विद्यारम्भं करिष्यामि सिद्धिर्भवतु मे सदा. वार्म अप्स कर लिए? अच्छा चलो बैठ जाओ अभी के लिए. we'll just start with some amount of insight into the whole idea of choreography, because when we talk about dance, the first thing that comes to one's mind is the choreography and the choreographer. And to today's context, I think the moment you say a choreographer, the first thing that comes to your mind is film choreography and film item number. So, because earlier I think the choreographer even in a film was not so well known, but today I think the dance choreographer has got a pride of place in a sense, and you celebrate it, and there is lots of build up for because the dance numbers, so to speak, or the item numbers have become very much important in a dance. That apart, coming to classical dance, the word choreography I don't think belongs to the Indian vocabulary, so to speak. It's definitely a borrowed phrase, because I have never heard, as I was learning dance from great gurus. So now that you are at the MA level and you have all gone through the margam, understood it, imbibed it, got the spirit of what the whole approach to Bharatanatyam is, which in itself is a huge learning in terms of understanding the tradition in its truest form as a reference point, particularly in terms of the formats, Talaripu, Jatiswaram, Shabdam, the Varnam, Padam, Javuli, Tillana, Kirtanam, and of course in the end kind of normally in the traditional repertoire you end with a shlokam, which brings it back to a quiet stillness. This whole thing is so rich in itself and so beautiful, yet the essence of any classical form, particularly in India, is to be able to improvise and take the whole thing forward and make it your own, in a sense. You're not doing the work of a postman, of picking a letter from here and giving it further. What you are doing is learning a beautiful art form, taking a handful from that beautiful river of creativity, and then also giving back to the river as your own contribution to the river. So that's how the flow becomes richer, and that's how the flow continues, because this is not a stagnant pool that you're talking about. You're talking about a very vibrant flowing river. So to make it more vibrant, you have to bring in your energies, your creativity, your contemporary sensibility also, because dance at any given point of time is relevant only during that time, for that period. So unless it in a sense reflects how things are changing around you, it becomes like a fossil. So in any classical dance form, what really makes it interesting is the fact that each artist brings his or her own individual statement to what is learned, what is created, and that's how I think the whole classical tradition is taken forward. Because you'll see that my guru would have taught it in a certain way to me, his gurus would have taught him in a certain way. So there is a certain progression that is taking place, and you know, the beautiful part is that my guru never told me that this is the only way to approach something. You know, they would always say that this is how it is, this I have put together something, and now it is your baby, see what you can, how you can play with it. So it's like giving you a whole set of skills and asking you to kind of, you know, work on it and put it together as you please, as you wish, and as the certain composition demands, you know. So in fact, I remember very clearly my guru using the words, "Na edo setirken." Setirken means I put together something. And that brings me to the key thing of choreography. What really is this whole huge noise now about choreography and of copyright, you know. So I think we come from a very anonymous culture. If you go to Khajuraho, none of those cultures have had signatures of the people who have created it. Or you go to Ajanta or any of these beautiful places where it's such a plethora of skill that you see there, but nobody is claiming it. Even the patron's name is not there. We come from that kind of a totally. So gurus never said this is my jati. He just always say, I put together something and see if it works for you, or we can still kind of, you know, customize it, or you are free to do whatever you want to do. So those were the kind of psychology that they had, that they would never say this. Of course, they were very, in a sense, proud of being of a particular gharana or a particular style that they were proud of. And after all, what is a gharana? The individual genius of one artist, which is so powerful and so wonderful that many people follow it. That's how a gharana comes about. Yeah. So if you say the gharana is something that is a watertight thing, it is not. It is something that one individual has so much of creativity and so much of geniosity in him that many people follow him, and that's how it becomes a gharana then. Many of our gharanas, of course, are names after a village particularly, or something like that, you know, Tanjavur style or Valluvur style or Pandanallur style. These are names of villages, and great teachers from there did a certain thing in a certain way, and then those traditions got expanded. So this whole system of gharanas, you know, is really the various teachers in various parts of Tamil Nadu creating their own work, and they were a little chauvinistic about the material that their particular gurus taught them, but as time went by, you know, things opened up a little more.
Akka, today dance has moved out, it's become international. People, you were telling us that these banis were village oriented. Now that people are moving out, what is the significance? How much have the gharanas maintained their identity in today's time?
It's an interesting question. I think this has to do a little with the history of the dance in a sense, because in the early 20th century, as you can see, that when dance came to Chennai in a sense, and when Kalakshetra was set up, I remember my own teacher being very, in a sense, threatened by this, because she came from the Devadasi tradition, and she had seen the whole transition of dance from temple to stage. And I remember her making comments, because I was a very young child. I don't kind of, at that time I didn't realize, I used to see her being very critical of things, but I really didn't know why she was so critical. Now looking back, it was a huge change where institutionalized teaching had come up, and you know, gurus had all come into the cities, and a lot of dance was happening in cinema. So there was a lot of things that all gurus were composing for cinema. So there was so much happening around that there was a churning of sorts, you know, and I think that's when the gharanas slowly kind of in a sense opened up, and it was not limited to, because there was one student going and learning from 2 or 3 teachers, so
From
you know,
different gharanas.
from different gharanas. So then slowly what happened is that individuality of the dancer herself or himself started coming. So I think that's when I think the slowly the opening up of styles, I would say, began, because I remember my own teacher Dandayadapani Pillai was teaching in Kalakshetra, singing in Kalakshetra, then coming out, doing his own thing, making dance also relevant to cinema. So he did a lot of things. So he composed for dance, compositions he composed. So I feel a lot of people like that moved out and did their own thing. So I think that's when the gharanas slowly, today I feel it's really, you can't see in a sense gharanas really making a statement the way they used to do. Earlier, you know, when I used to go to Chennai, I used to always narrate this little story. I used to go particularly to at least 4 concerts which were distinctly of gharanas, you know. So I like to see that range and variety of seeing one Varuvur style, one Pandanallur style, one Kalakshetra style, one Tanjavur style, and everybody even would dress differently, everybody would even go back differently, walk differently, the eye movements would be different, there would be particular typical adavus done in that particular style. So it would be interesting, but today I see when I go to Chennai, it's one monochromatic kind of a you know, scene, dance scene, where everybody is chic, everybody is in a sense the same way of wearing the flower, the same way of wearing the dress. It is not really in that sense, that range one can't really see, because it's become more, dance has become more professional, so to speak. That's
More
how standardized, and more, I think the people think themselves to be very professional in a certain way. That is being professional, is what the definition of being professional is.
Soka, from say from now, 30 years from now, would you imagine seeing different gharanas in Bharatanatyam? Seeing from the trends.
Again, it depends on the individual genius of a certain artist, if such somebody who is so, but you know, it's difficult simply because it's very personalized today. If you see say Yamini Akka's style, it's her personal statement of the dance, you know. Though she learnt from Kalakshetra, she had to do a lot of unlearning when she went to Yellappa Pillai, because his was totally related to music, dance and music. So he would, even if he kept a hand like that, there would be a musicality in the way he did a particular movement. So she herself, I remember telling me, when she first class, she says, he used to say, why are you pushing your hand? Gently keep your hand, you know. So I think she went through so much of training from so many different people that ultimately it was Yamini style, you know. So I think you will see many of such people where, but how much of it is she going to be able to transmit for it to become a kind of a style that can be carried forward is something very, very difficult to say, because you know, she had a certain charisma and a style and a persona to carry off that style. So I think there you'll see many more of that kind, where it's a personal statement. So it will be many such personal statements and not necessarily gharanas.
Also because now hereditarily it's not passed on, and it's
Absolutely. Absolutely, the gurus are not there, their children haven't taken it on, the Isaivillar community is no longer there in a sense. So it's only dancers, performers teaching. So it's that kind of a system now. So I feel there is bound to be change. Now again, coming back to how do you push the existing margam which you have learnt, and how does a student actually take the step forward and make it your own, or make it something that brings something of you into the dance. Again, coming back to choreography, the word choreography, it's come from outside. It's not typically a word that is used. I think I would prefer to use some rachana. That's what I think actually says what we do in dance, because choreography literally means writing dance, you know. So we are not writing dance here, no. Literally that's what it means, but the connotation changed over a period of time. It became putting together dance or assembling dance, all these kinds of things. But we don't do that, and choreography necessarily, I think, in the West had a significance because it was group.
Right.
And essentially it meant assembling, because there are multiple bodies, so you assemble. So you choreograph, space vis-a-vis bodies. But here it's a solo form, you know. So what does choreography then mean in the Indian context, and how I feel it's a very wrong word in a sense, you know. It really doesn't bring out what we actually want to say, and how we, because there are so many elements in the dance that you need to really understand before you can, because dance, as you can see, has poetry, it has music, it has melody, it has rhythm, it has yogic positions and postures that you take, it has mythology, it has the whole spiritual quality about it. You have to understand that. It has a cultural ethos that is also reflected, because after all, when you talk about Bharatanatyam, it has been nurtured in a particular state by a particular people. So it has to reflect the regional flavor of that particular and the regional temperament of those people. So I think so many diverse kind of skills are used. So just by saying choreography, it really doesn't reflect the depth or the kind of ingredients that you're using, you know, in actually putting together. That's why Sanrachana means a much wider word, which brings in at least the idea that there are many elements that are being, in a sense, put in to bring out the beauty of the dance. And that's the basic thing, is when you need to innovate, is a very difficult word right now for you people. I think in order to push, the first thing is to understand all these elements. You have to have an in-depth understanding of poetry, of music, of dance, of rhythm, of mythology. I think all these elements, unless they are thoroughly understood beyond the margam, what is required for the margam is not good enough. You have to learn more, understand more, go deeper into it, go into every aspect of it in detail. Then you'll get little pearls of wisdom from each one of this, which then sparks off other things that you put together and relate. So choreography, in a sense, does not, again it is, I think, come with the idea of writing about dance. You know, when people started writing, which is, again, reviewing is a very recent kind of a thing in dance. Again, teachers never liked this idea initially of reviewing a dance. They would always say one has to enjoy the dance, one has to kind of, you know, and they would never say you see a dance, you actually experience a dance performance. So, you know, the whole thing, when you needed to write, you needed words. So, you know, you just borrow it from the West and just use these words as and when, how. And the other thing about creativity and pushing frontiers is that it cannot be done at a particular stage. Now that you finish your margam, now you start thinking about how you're going to innovate, how you're going to kind of create a jati or create a pattern or create. In the pedagogy itself, it has to be built in. It is built in. Many times you don't realize that it is built in, and you structure it so much and you feel that a certain jati, unless I do it this way, it is not going to be accepted, and it cannot be, you know, you try to make it very, very in a watertight compartment and say this is the only way to do it, and actually that is your own filling in, you need to also break out from that and see if it's a tisram, why not if it be done in another way. If you really understand the pacing and the spacing what is required, how can you not? Also, I feel as a performer, over the years one has danced in such different spaces. So the same jati, when you take it to different spaces and you see suddenly there's a huge space, and you might have done a takita like this in the class, you need to occupy the space. Then you go on stage and improvise. You suddenly do a takita, outward takita, simply because you need to occupy the space. So unless you are very, very clear about the rhythm, unless you are very clear about the breakup of each of these, it's very difficult to improvise in pure dance. Improvising in pure dance requires a thorough understanding, a complete breakup, a complete, atom to atom understanding of how the structure of the jati goes. How only then can you improvise and have the strength and presence of mind, even on stage, to play around with the jati. That's I think very, very an important key if you're becoming a performer, and you have to see different spaces and react to it instantly. So that's one kind of improvisation where you have an existing controlled parameters, and within those parameters you push. The second thing is, in pedagogy, when I said, supposing there are certain structured adavus that you have, and you are kind of learning the basics, and as you proceed, and that's one thing we always need to remember, that you constantly need to do adavu classes. I see many times what happens is adavus are done initially, and then you only come to the class and start doing pieces. Of course, as you go along, the way you have to do your sadhana requires a lot of mentoring. You have to do some amount of work to remember and sequence your pieces. You need to do some amount of work for stamina. You need to some amount of work for body preparedness. You need to do some amount of work to, again, as I said, adavus, so that you break it up and you see where the connections are and what are the elements that you can move and push and how much. So unless you do constantly the adavus, you are not able to then kind of give the visual patterns that you would like to. So I think just coming to a class, starting your alaripu, then doing your next piece, and that's not the way to practice, which many times I think we tend to overlook that if it's just a program that you're rehearsing for, bas wo items aa gaye, kar liya, and then namaskar karke you go. But that's exactly the typical way of staying within a round small area and not moving out. Moving out requires that ability. If it's a chatusram, in what all different ways is a certain adavu to be approached, and to be visually to create variety, and to also in a sense be able to give it a emotional content, So this is a very interesting kind of a subject, and one can go on and on. We will continue this discussion and take the specifics of how in pedagogy we take the dialogue forward in the next class.